Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. I am your co host, Tim Hannon, and my other co host is
Steve Wirt.
the affable Steve Wirt.
Affable. Wow, nice. I don't even know what that word means.
I'm pretty sure it's positive.
Let's see. Define affable.
Ask ChatGPT.
Friendly, good nature, or easy to talk to. Nice. There you go.
All right, I take it back. You're not affable.
The least affable person.
Anyway, on this episode, we are going to talk about unlikely events that shape Pittsburgh sports history. So, Steve, are you familiar with the term butterfly effect?
Is it when the butterflies come back from Capistrano? Oh, no, that's the swallows.
No, it
Sounds
basically
like a movie with Ashton Kutcher.
it was a movie with Ashton Kutcher, which was the same principle, but it was coined when a meteorologist discovered that tiny little changes in an environment, butterfly type changes, could drastically alter the weather. This concept, exists in sports too, where events that seemingly had nothing to do with Pittsburgh sports teams ended up drastically altering the course of Pittsburgh sports history, and that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. And we're going to start with some plays, like single plays in games, not involving Pittsburgh teams that basically changed the Pittsburgh sports space-time continuum.
Into this alternate 2024.
That's right. That's right. Somewhere along
real to you and me, but
somewhere along the history, the timeline skewed thanks to these events that we're going to talk about. So we're going to start with a 2003 game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Arizona Cardinals. It's the final week.
Couldn't possibly have any effect on us today.
Well, let's find out. So it's the final week of the 2003 season. Vikings and Cardinals are playing at Arizona, and the Vikings, they need a win.
Yeah, it's going to involve, what's his name? Josh McCown, isn't it?
It is. So the Vikings need a win to qualify for the playoffs, and lucky for them, because Arizona stinks. The Cardinals are 3-12. They're just playing out the string at this point. Sure enough, Minnesota is up 17-6 at the 2-minute warning. So you figure, Steve, 17-6 at the 2-minute warning, that's pretty much a guaranteed win, right?
But not when you got Josh McCown at quarterback, too.
Yeah. So the guy that Steve mentioned, Cardinals quarterback Josh McCown, who apparently, hold on, I'm sorry. So yeah, the guy that Steve mentioned, Cardinals quarterback Josh McCown, who ends up playing until like age 54. I think he was still playing like a year ago.
Yeah, I think he just retired last season.
He throws a touchdown pass on 4th down to cut the deficit to 17-12. So they were already down to their last play. He gets a touchdown. Then the Cardinals have to do an onside kick, which they recover. I mean, that's such a low percentage play, but they recover an onside kick and they drive down the field. But at this point, they're out of timeouts. And with under 30 seconds left, you're out of timeouts. You're trying to drive. What's the one thing you cannot do in that situation, Steve?
Take a sack.
Take a sack. Well, Josh McCown.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that would be bad too.
I mean, you could understand an interception though in that situation.
At least you're getting a pass off, right? But Josh McCown, who apparently graduated from the Kent Graham School of Quarterbacking, he takes a sack. So we're going to play some audio of what happens next. Here's the situation. The Cardinals have the ball on the Minnesota 28-yard line. They've just taken a sack, and the clock is quickly ticking down to 0. So they're all trying to rush to the line of scrimmage in the hope of getting one last playoff. And here's the audio of that moment via announcer Paul Allen, who still to this day is the Minnesota Vikings' great play-by-play guy.
And the clock continues to run, PA.
17, 16, 15.
See, they have to go deep into the end zone.
We better put some people in the end zone, right, Joe?
That's exactly right.
I mean, there's nobody inside the 10.
Get back, guys.
Here it is. The season's on the line. 2 receivers left and right. McCown takes the snap. He steps up. He's all by himself. Fires into the end zone. Caught! Touchdown! No! No! The Cardinals have knocked the Vikings out of the playoffs. They're Minnesota Vikings crying on the field.
Crying? I don't know. I don't think Dante Culpepper really cared. Like, hey, I got a cruise to get to.
It's one of the most improbable wins probably of this century in the
That
NFL.
was in Arizona too.
That was in Arizona. I mean, you had this 3-win team
That's
with nothing
the
to
old
play for.
stadium too. The
Right.
old whatever. wherever
The
they play.
Tempe, the Arizona State Stadium. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you had this 3-win team with nothing to play for. They hadn't done anything all day. Then they score a touchdown on their last play. Like they're down to their last play, 4th down. They score a touchdown. They recover an onside kick, then throw this desperation pass into the corner of the end zone to knock the Vikings out of the playoffs. It's an all-time comeback. It's an all-time tragedy if you're a Minnesota Vikings fan. But Steve, what does any of this have to do with Pittsburgh? Why were we talking about this on a Pittsburgh podcast? Well,
Well,
yeah, let's talk about that.
who
So,
was in, Tim?
had Arizona lost, they would have had the #1 overall draft pick in the 2004 draft. By the time the draft comes, they had hired a new head coach, Denny Green, and they would have for sure taken Ole Miss quarterback Eli Manning with that #1 pick. Eli, of course, did not want to play for San Diego, but he's made it very clear over the years that that was specific to that organization. He and his dad felt that it was a poorly run organization where quarterbacks went to die, as evidenced by Ryan Leaf and Drew Brees. And there's nothing to suggest that Eli had any problem with Arizona or with a coach as respected as Dennis Green was at the time. So if Minnesota had won that game, Arizona drafts Eli Manning, the Chargers would have gotten Philip Rivers just like they did in the original history. And then guess who the Giants take, Steve?
What's his name? Kellen Winslow.
No, they would have taken a quarterback, a tall
So not
quarterback,
gonna take Kellen Winslow.
a guy named Ben Roethlisberger. Giants general manager Ernie Accorsi is on record saying he would have taken Ben had they not been able to swing that trade with the Chargers. In fact, he had even written Ben's name on the card.
Wow.
Yeah, he actually wrote Ben's name on the card. They were going to walk up to the podium had the Chargers not agreed to that trade. So had there been no opportunity for a trade for Eli because the Cardinals just would have taken him, then Ben goes to the Giants, and that means that the Steelers probably end up with Sean Andrews at number 11,
Or Kellen
And-
Winslow.
and they don't go on to win 2 Super Bowls or have 18 seasons of a guy who's
So
top
you're
5
still
all-time in
saying
passing
Kellen
yards.
Winslow gets drafted 9 overall by the Browns?
The Browns are still going to Browns, and probably
The Browns.
If I had
the
to guess.
Browns. The quote. It was what's his name? It was Claypool, wasn't it? Browns be Browns.
Yeah. Yep. So that miracle ending by the Cardinals ends up producing 2 championships here in Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Josh McDown.
Yeah. So
I
so
think was
here's
Dave McGinnis still the coach? of the
I
Cardinals?
believe so. Yeah. I mean, it was
Thank you,
just
Dave Mc-
and again, they
he
had
was
nothing
one
to
of the
play
worst
for.
Coaches. He's the
Yeah,
one of the
and-
worst NFL coaches of all time.
He was bad. The team was bad. There was nothing for them to play for, and they pulled off this huge upset. And it wasn't just that they pulled off an upset. I mean, they were getting killed all day, and then they just had this miracle ending. 2 final footnotes on that, Steve. Number 1, that play is an incompletion if it happens today, because Nate Pohl, the receiver, he only got 1 foot in bounds.
Oh, there was no replay. I don't.
No. There was a replay. Remember, back then the rule was if you were rolled to have gotten forced out.
Oh yeah, the old force out rule. Because it looks like if you look at it, looks like the Holmes catch from the Super Bowl. Ironically enough.
It does, but if you look at the replay, he very clearly only gets his other foot is on the thigh of the Minnesota defender, but he gets pushed out. Now, today that rule is it doesn't matter. You can get pushed out. There's no subjective kind of rolling.
So you could be sitting on top of 3 people, and if they drag you out of bounds.
Yes,
it's
correct.
fine.
Correct.
Sitting
But back then, the rule was if the defender wouldn't have been there, he would have gotten 2 feet in. So that's why it's a completion. That would have been incomplete today, and then the Steelers don't get bent. The other footnote is let's assume pretty safely that the Steelers don't go 15-1 in 2004 with Brian St. Pierre as their starting quarterback. Right? I think that's a safe assumption.
Well, maybe they would have won 14-2.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Because that's who would have been their quarterback. Because Maddox and Batch still would have gotten hurt. That's who would have been their quarterback in 2004 is Brian St.
Much as I
Pierre.
love Boston College quarterbacks.
So that means that they probably at worst have a mid-round selection in the 2005 draft. Would they have drafted Aaron Rodgers? Because remember, that's the draft 2005.
Yeah, he fell. Yeah.
Yep. So that's another
Well, I
interesting.
guess it
to
all
think
would have
about.
worked out in the end. So this is just your way of getting us Aaron Rodgers in Pittsburgh.
Well, it's just a bunch of interesting what ifs. And again, like that play, that whole sequence of events, and then that play, that's just so improbable that happened. And if none of that happens, if they get stopped on fourth down, if the Vikings recover the onside kick, if they sack them and the game ends, then
Who's the coach of the
history is very
Vikings?
different.
It wasn't Denny Green at that point, right? No, he had been
I don't remember. Brad Childress, maybe. I don't remember who was the
Mike
Tice.
Tice.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably Mike Tice.
Yep. All right, let's talk about another play that didn't involve a Pittsburgh team. On September 18th, 1992, the Atlanta Braves are playing the Houston Astros. It's a late season game. The Braves are in first place in the National League West with a very slim lead over the Reds in the standings. So this is an important game for them. In 1992, the Braves are platooning two catchers, Damon Berryhill and Greg Olson. And it's Olson who gets the start for this game. In the fourth inning, the Astros are up 6-3, and they have Ken Caminiti at third base with one out. Pete Incaviglia is at the plate. He hits a fly ball to shallow right field. And I mean, it's shallow. It's clearly not deep enough for a sac fly. But Caminiti says, you know what? Screw that. I'm Ken freaking Caminiti. I can still beat the throw. So he takes off for home plate. Somewhere between third base and home plate, Caminiti realizes he's going to be out by a country mile. So he does about the only thing he can do in that situation.
Make a quick throw to Olson, and the ball and the runner arrive simultaneously. And Olson gets drilled by Ken Caminiti. He hung onto the baseball, but he is still down.
So Ken
Hey,
Cam,
that's where you were allowed to run into the catcher.
yeah, yes. So this would also be a play that would never happen today because it'd be
Back
illegal.
when men were men and boys were boys and dogs were dogs and cats were cats. I don't know.
Back then, you were allowed to bowl over the catcher, and that's what Ken Caminiti does. He collides with Greg Olson. Olson's ankle gets caught
Well, he was
behind
just
him.
channeling his inner NFL running back. You know?
He was, yeah, and it ends up hurting Greg Olson. He actually breaks his ankle on that play.
Who cares about Greg Olson?
And he's designated out for the season that same night, which is seemingly a bad break for Atlanta because they're heading into the postseason. But what does any of this have to do with Pittsburgh? Well, for the playoffs that year, the Braves need a backup catcher to replace Greg Olson, so they call up a guy named Francisco Cabrera. Fast forward to the bottom of the ninth inning of Game 7 against the Pirates, and it's Francisco Cabrera who gets the hit off of Stan Belinda that wins the series. And that would have been Greg Olson's at bat, not.
Well, maybe Greg
Cabrera.
Olson hits a home run, and we're all disappointed anyway.
It's entirely possible. For what it's worth, Greg Olson was a career 242 hitter who up to that point had never gotten a hit off of Stan Belinda. So, yeah, it doesn't mean that Greg Olson went and got a hit there too, but we know that
Maybe
Francisco
due.
Cabrera got a hit. So Greg Olson being at the plate would have at least guaranteed some kind of potential for a different result. And it's because of that collision in September. That's the only reason Cabrera is even on the postseason roster.
We can all blame Ken Caminiti.
Yes, Ken Caminiti ruined the Pirates. Thanks, Ken Caminiti.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. All right, let's
There's
talk
a reason
about.
I didn't like that guy.
Yeah, he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't a big fan of his either. And then realizing that he was responsible for Francisco Cabrera being up at the plate makes me not like him even more. And that you saw that play, Steve. You can't see the video on the podcast, but that was not a deep fly ball. I mean, why was he running there? It was just because he's like, whatever, I can do it. I can run really hard and just break the guy's ankle and then he'll
Aggressive
drop it.
base running, Tim. Aggressive. base
Yeah.
running.
Yeah, aggressive, sure. All right, let's go back to 1984 and the
Sounds
Eagles.
like an ominous year.
I heard they wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
The Eagles are playing the 49ers. The 49ers are really good in 1984. In fact, they're going to end up going 15-1 on their way to the Super Bowl. But in week 4, they're playing at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, and they have a problem. Their starting quarterback, Joe Montana, is injured. So they have to start their backup, a guy named Matt Cavanaugh.
Nice.
Cavanaugh, of course, is known around these parts as the quarterback of the 1976 Pitt National Championship team, and later,
last time Pitt won a national championship.
Yep, and then later as the Pitt offensive coordinator under Dave Wanstead.
They didn't win a national championship.
Now, you might think that that's the Pittsburgh connection here, but it actually is not. Cavanaugh says after the game that he was pretty nervous, but he doesn't look nervous. He throws a 35-yard touchdown pass to Roger Craig in the first quarter. And then with just 12 seconds left before halftime, Cavanaugh finds Freddie Solomon in the end zone for his second touchdown of the game. So at this point, there's only 12 seconds left in the half. The 49ers don't want to take a risk on a long return on the ensuing kickoff. So place kicker Ray Wershing, he squibs his kick. And here is that play.
I have a feeling he might be doing it today on that second game of the doubleheader. Handled by a member of the wedge. That's Struthers who brings it out. Wershing tried to kick that one a little low and tried to get it into that vacuum area back there so that nobody could run it back at all. 11-yard return.
Looks like he got dinged a little bit.
I think I know who that is who got dinged a little bit.
Yeah, so what happens on that play is that because it's a squib kick, it bounces to the area where there are like 3 big wedge blockers, and it's fielded by one of those guys, a big defensive lineman named Thomas Struthers, and the other wedge guys immediately try to block for him. And that play goes nowhere, just like you would expect, right? You're doing a squib kick, it's the up back, it's just going to get stuffed after 2 yards. But as you heard in that audio, someone got dinged up, and it's a linebacker for the Eagles wearing number 57. Steve?
Is it William Laird Cower?
It is Bill Cower.
Yeah.
He badly injures his knee on the play, and he's out for the rest of the season. That veteran.
Oh, gee, I hope that doesn't hurt his career. No.
and that veteran stadium turf, I mean, that was like concrete.
Yeah,
that was always
that was
notorious.
yeah, they're playing in a parking lot. Yeah.
Right. So to your point, Steve, the following off season, Cower's trying to rehab the knee, and he gets a call from his old defensive coordinator in Cleveland, a guy named Marty Schottenheimer, who has just taken over as the head coach of the Browns. And he asked Cower, hey, would you like to be an assistant coach on my new staff? Cower is only 27 years old at this point. So 27, you've still got several years of good football potentially left in your career, except he has this terrible knee injury, and he's already kind of a borderline NFL player. So he decides, I could try to rehab the knee. I could try to come back. I could try to catch on with the team as a backup or as a special teams player or whatever. But he decides that, he probably will have better luck trying his hand at coaching. Fast
I
forward.
wonder how that's going to turn out for him.
Well, fast forward about 35 years, and Bill Cowher is inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame as one of the greatest Steelers coaches ever. Had he ever hurt his knee, Cowher says, quote, I could be teaching school right now. He says, I remember the spot and I remember the play.
Wow. And Ray Wershing, the last guy to kick a drop kick in the NFL. Or I'm not there. It was a drop? No, free kick.
Oh, okay.
The fair catch kick, whatever.
Okay.
He's the last guy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and they were just the Matt Cavanaugh throwing that touchdown pass with 12 seconds left. If there would have been 30 seconds left, or a minute left, he probably kicks it deep. He just does that squib kick, and Cowher gets hurt on that play, and that's what leads to the end of his career and the start of his playing career and the start of his coaching career. So, pretty interesting how that worked out. For what it's worth, here were the other guys who the Steelers had interviewed in 1992 when they did hire Bill Cowher. So they interviewed Rod Rust, who had been the defensive coordinator under Chuck Noll at one point. They interviewed Kevin Gilbride, who later became the offensive coordinator under Cowher. They interviewed Dave Wanstead, and they interviewed Joe Green. And Cowher says, this wasn't
two of those
verified.
guys were just courtesy interview, like, yeah, we're being nice.
Well, Cowher says that he was told, and this was not verified by Dan Rooney, I don't think, but he was told that the 3 finalists were him, Wanstead, and Joe Green.
Really, Joe Green? Wow. Huh. I've never heard like, well, I mean, he coached for a while, but I never heard him seriously mentioned for a head coach.
I would have, yeah, I kind of tend to doubt that too, that the Steelers would have seriously considered hiring him. But I could have seen them hiring Wanstead. I mean, Wanstead was
Yeah.
their type of coach 100%. And, you know, who knows what happens with Dave Wanstead at that point?
He's in the Hall of Fame.
I probably not.
Maybe you have Matt Cavanaugh as your offensive coordinator
Yeah,
along the way.
yeah, you probably would have definitely had that. That's one thing you could have banked on. But I mean, isn't that crazy? Like that little squib kick is why the Steelers probably ended up with Bill Cowher, because if he plays 3 or 4 more years, maybe he gets into coaching eventually. But remember, Marty Schottenheimer by that point had built a really powerful team in Cleveland. And I doubt he's looking for assistants, really young, inexperienced assistants at that point. And even if he is, then Cowher still has to spend several years
Yeah.
working his
coming.
way up.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting turn of events. Yes, the butterfly has flapped its wings
for sure,
on that one.
for sure.
Thank God for Ray Wershing in his Tecmo Bowl glory.
And Matt Cavanaugh, let's give Matt Cavanaugh some credit there too, throwing that touchdown pass.
Yeah, that late touchdown pass.
All right, so those 3 things we mentioned were literally plays. Now let's talk about something a little different. Let's go back to 1985, and let's go about as far away from Pittsburgh as possible. Let's go to Moscow.
Wow. In
Beautiful city.
1985? Yeah, I love communism. And who doesn't these days?
There's a woman in Moscow in
Well, except for the
1985.
people of Moscow in 1985, they didn't like communism very much.
Probably not. But there's a woman in Moscow in 1985 by the name of Tatiana Ovechkina. She had been a star basketball player for the Soviets. She won 2 Olympic gold medals, the 1975 World Championship, and 6 European championships. In fact, the Soviets never even once lost a game in an official international competition with Tatiana as the captain of their basketball team. So that's pretty impressive. By this point in her career, she's 35 years old. She decides she's done with her basketball career. She wants to start a family. She and her husband conceive a baby. And on September 17th, 1985, she gives birth to a baby boy by the name of Alexander Ovechkin. Growing up, Alexander, he's not into basketball like his mom. Instead, he's into another sport, hockey, so much so that he starts playing it. He becomes pretty darn good at it. By the time he's a teenager, a lot of NHL teams are starting to take notice. And when the 2003 NHL draft rolls around, Alexander Ovechkin is a prime prospect. But there's a problem. We mentioned that Tatiana gave birth to Alexander on September 17th. Well, NHL draft rules stipulate the players are not eligible for the draft until their 18th birthday. I'm sorry. NHL draft rules stipulate the players are not eligible for the draft unless their 18th birthday falls by September 15th. So
When was he
Ovechkin
born?
misses the 17th.
2 days. Wow.
Yep.
That's
Ovechkin misses being eligible for the draft by 2 days, and he has to wait a full calendar year to go to the NHL. So how does that impact Pittsburgh, Steve? Well,
yeah,
guess
they
who had the number 1
drafted-
pick in 2003?
I think we did, yes.
Yeah, we did.
And we drafted Malkin. I believe.
No, we drafted Fleury.
Oh, Flurry. That was the Flurry, yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
so the Penguins could have conceivably had Ovechkin, Crosby, and Malkin all on the same team, but
It would have hurt not having a goaltender.
they wouldn't have had
Had-
Fleury.
We needed to score a lot of goals.
Yeah, and then do they beat the Red Wings in 2009 without Fleury there to make that save?
Yeah.
So that's crazy to think about. Now, here's another wrinkle. That number 1 pick wasn't ours outright. It had been traded to the Penguins by the Florida Panthers. The Penguins originally had the 3rd pick and traded up to number 1. So if Ovechkin is eligible, do the Panthers hang on to that pick? And let's explore that scenario for a moment. If the Panthers wind up with Ovechkin, is it Pittsburgh, Florida that has that rivalry all those years instead of Pittsburgh, Washington? Also the
Doesn't
second
quite have
pick.
the same ring to it, does it? That there's
No.
all those great Penguin Panther games.
Exactly. Right. Or do they build the team around him that Washington did? Right. The second pick in that draft belonged to Carolina, who had a very weak goaltending situation at the time. So did they take Fleury instead of Eric Stahl? And if Fleury is on the Hurricanes in 2009, Do they
So,
beat the Penguins in the conference finals that year?
Yeah, he's not giving up tons of goals to Malkin, probably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So the point being here that Ovechkin missing that deadline by 48 hours creates all sorts of chaos in the sport space-time continuum of sports. And
Or
just
she had
think
been
about,
pregnant like a week earlier or something. Yeah, you never know.
well, and just think about that, Steve. Think about it like a pregnancy and all the factors there. Babies come early, babies come late. Heck,
Yeah.
Tatiana may have been in labor on the night of the 15th, but the baby didn't come till the 17th, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just like just hours, literally hours difference.
I blame socialized medicine.
Yeah, that was crazy. I mean, just 2 days, and that impacted Ovechkin's career too, because at the time of this recording, he's going for that all-time goals record. He could have had a
Yeah,
whole
he
another
lost a
season.
year.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So crazy to think that her having that baby at that point really impacted so many things, including, the Penguins' trajectory.
Yeah, I mean that would have been I've always said it would be interesting to see Crosby and Ovechkin on the same team. I think he would be the perfect winger for Crosby. And you think Ovechkin has a lot of goals now. He might have broke Gretzky's record with Crosby passing him the puck. I mean,
Yeah. With all due respect to Alexander Semin and
yeah.
whoever other centers Ovechkin played with over the years, yeah, it's not quite Sidney Crosby. So yeah, that's an interesting, again, butterfly effect thing there. So for our next one, we had said that Josh McCown is indirectly responsible for 2 Steelers Super Bowls. Do you know who is indirectly responsible for all 6 Steelers Super Bowls, Steve?
Indirectly responsible for all 6?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. Is it a historical figure?
It is the Oakland Athletics.
Of baseball?
Yep. What are you
Wow,
talking
okay.
about, Tim?
Well, there you go. What you talk about, Willis?
So before we get there, let's once again hop in the podcast time machine, and we're going to go further back, I'm pretty sure, than we've ever gone before on the show, all the way back to the year 1682.
Oh, really? So the Pilgrims were playing baseball before it was invented?
So what happens in 1682 is Pennsylvania enacts a law that creates a ban on, quote, whoever does or performs any worldly employment or business whatsoever on the Lord's Day, commonly called Sunday, or uses or practices
We are
any
Quakers, Tim. We ain't gonna be doing no sports or transacting nothing.
or uses or practices any game, hunting, shooting, sport, or diversion whatsoever on the same day not
You should be in
authorized by
church,
law.
Tim, without any instruments, singing with your natural voice that God gave you, because that's how the Quakers worship.
Yeah, that's exactly that's exactly what that law was. It's a blue law. You can play sports on any day of the week, but not Sunday. And so you'd think, okay, fine, that like
Except
Steve
for those
said,
heathens out in the West, they can play lacrosse all they want. Yeah.
and like you said, Steve, that's Pennsylvania was a Quaker settlement at the time. You'd think that law probably went away when it became a state, but nope. It survives for hundreds of years, and it's still in place verbatim by the 1930s, like exactly how it was written in 1682. That's still on the books.
Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Actually, I mean, I kind of like stuff being closed on. As I've gotten older, I like the stuff being closed on Sundays. Not necessarily like playing a sport, but do I really need to go to like Walmart on a Sunday? Can't I wait till Monday or do it on Saturday, or give the people like a day off? We'll make enough money. Like there's other businesses do that, Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby.
Yeah,
they seem to make enough money to get by, and their employees are okay. So I don't know. I'm not saying you got to close the hospitals or anything. I mean, obviously, police officers and firefighters and such are going to have to work. But
so you're saying we should go back to Quaker
I'm not saying
legislation?
we need a law to state it. I'm just saying it would be nice if more businesses closed on Sunday. But
yeah,
I'm getting old, I guess.
No, I'm with you on that. I'm with you.
I voluntarily closed, not
right.
not
And it would be nice, like you said, they give their people a day with their families too. Yeah. So after World War I, Pennsylvanians are starting to think like, hey, maybe this is antiquated. I mean, you figure they were fighting
It's
battles
good
to
enough
defend
for
our
William
nation.
Penn. It's good enough for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're fighting battles in World War I on a Sunday. Why can't we play sports? So one of the places it really boils over is in Philadelphia, where they have a really popular baseball team called,
That would be the Connie Mack's team, the Philadelphia Athletics.
yep,
Yeah.
they win the World Series in 1929. They repeat in 1930, and then they actually come within one game of making it a three-peat when they lose Game 7 of the 31 World Series to the Cardinals. The A's are owned and managed, as Steve said, by a guy named Connie Mack. He's starting to feel the pinch financially of what it takes to field a competitive team every year, and he's looking for new revenue streams. And remember, there's no TV in the 1930s, so you're making all your money at the gate. And there's also no night games in 1930s. So you're depending a lot on weekday baseball games when people are mostly at work. Meanwhile, there's this day on the weekend called Sunday when most people are off of work, but the A's can't play games on Sundays because of the 1682 Blue Law.
Wow. It all comes full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah. So they decide, you know what, we're going to try to challenge it. And at first, the A's just try playing games on Sundays to see if anyone will try to stop them. And they're surprised to find out that, yes, there are still a group of people who care about the law. They even get taken to court. So they decide, okay, that strategy is not going to work. Instead, they realize that they need to get the law actually changed. So the A's lobby the Pennsylvania legislature to alter the law. And they find a lot of sympathetic voices, probably a lot of lawmakers who agree that it's antiquated, but also a lot of lawmakers who want to get reelected because the A's also drum up a bunch of public support for this. And polls show that voters across the state, especially in the big cities, approve of this measure by 7-1 margins. And you know, Steve, that getting anybody to agree on anything by a 7-1 margin is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is pretty impressive. Yeah.
So in 1933, they pass a compromise referendum that says baseball and football could be played on Sunday between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock p.m. It's not, you just can't play any time of the day, but you can play between those hours. It works out well. People can still go to church in the mornings, but you can play your games in the afternoons. So the voters overwhelmingly approve of this at the ballot box, and the A's start holding Sunday baseball games. Hurrah. But how does this impact Pittsburgh? Well, you probably already guessed. In 1933, there's a businessman in Pittsburgh named Art Rooney. He's been trying to get into the pro football world for years. In the 1920s, he had started a semi-pro team called the Hope Harveys, but they also had limitations because of the blue laws. And for football, it's even worse than baseball, Steve, because at least baseball you could play on Saturdays, but football you couldn't because college.
Right.
You know, and no fan would have dared choose pro football over college football back then had they been played on the same day. So even though the NFL had been around for 13 years at this point, Rooney, along with any other potential Pittsburgh football owner, never bothered to apply for a team because he knew he wouldn't make any money not being able to play on Sundays. Well, when the blue law was revised in 1933 to allow for Sunday football, guess who starts a NFL football team in Pittsburgh? It's Art Rooney.
Well,
and of course,
Bert Bell starts in Philadelphia.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So both of those teams are born after the blue law is changed. And of course, both of those teams are still playing to this day to the love and enjoyment of all of us fans here in Pittsburgh. And here is the chief remembering that.
We had the blue laws in Pennsylvania. You weren't allowed to play on Sundays. You weren't allowed to do practically anything on Sundays. And they voted the blue laws out in 1933. And when they voted the blue laws out, I was a friend of Joe Kors, who was the president of the National Football League. And I just took my team, which was the best team, I think, around here. And you could get a lot of arguments about that. And I just took it into the National Football League for $2,500. And I could have got a lot cheaper if I would have argued.
I love that.
He's such like a Pittsburgher. I love it. It's just like, oh, it's the best team around here. Just the way he says that. That's like such a North Side Pittsburgh thing. I love it.
Yeah. And I love how he said he could have gotten a team for a lot cheaper had he just bargained.
He's a Trey. He was a character, man. I gotta love that guy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the reason the Steelers exist, because the A's, who now play in Oakland and soon to play in Las Vegas, that they were successful at the time. They had a bunch of fans support behind them, and people said, it's time to change this law, and the A's pushed for it, and that's why there's a football team in Pittsburgh.
Yay, Connie Mack.
Yeah. Yep. Who funny enough had been fired by the Pirates about 30 years before that.
Wow. All
So,
comes full circle.
All comes full circle. All right, let's go to another time and place that seemingly has little to do with Pittsburgh. It's the campus of Sacramento State College in 1969. I wonder what was happening there. Probably a lot of war protests.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah. Peace, love, hope.
Yeah. Guys,
Summer love.
hippies sitting out on the grass. That's how I just imagine the entire 60s.
Man, Nixon sucks, man.
Well, one thing I can tell you for sure that was happening there was a broadcasting major by the name of Len Shapiro, and he's working for the Sacramento Ice Hockey Association while he completes his degree. And one night he asked a fellow broadcasting major, "Hey, want to come to the hockey game with me tonight?" And the other student, who's a native Californian, he's like, "Yeah, I'm a baseball guy. I'm just really not that into hockey. No thanks." And he says, quote, "What do I know about hockey? There's a red line, a blue line. What else? I haven't got a clue about hockey." And he tells his friend, "No, man, I don't want to sit down and watch a sport that I don't even understand." But Len Shapiro keeps pushing and pushing. He says, "Come on, just come anyway. You never know." Well, the fellow student was a guy named Mike Lang. And he finally relents and he says, "Okay, fine, I'll come to your stupid hockey game." And sure enough, Mike Lang likes the sport, and he even gets a job with the local team there, working the penalty box. The following season, which is Mike Lang's senior year, the team announcer quit because he wanted a raise from the $5 per game he was getting paid to announce. And Mike Lang is a college student. He's like, "Sure, I'll call games for $5, right? That'll buy me some pizza and beer."
Yeah.
And that becomes his first ever broadcasting gig. From there, he works a few other jobs in hockey, and he ultimately winds up in Pittsburgh in 1974 to call games for the city's fledgling NHL franchise, the Penguins. Fast forward 50 years, and Lang, who's now retired, is one of Pittsburgh's most beloved sports figures. His voice will be forever recognized by a generation of Penguins fans, all because a guy named Len Shapiro was persistent about getting him to come out to a game that night back in 1969.
I didn't realize Lang had been with the Penguins through the really bad times, like in 74.
Yeah. He was there almost their entire existence, really.
Yeah.
Mike Lang is a big believer in fate. He says that going to that game at Sacramento State that night literally changed his life.
Oh, yeah, you can't argue that. Yeah.
So, and since I really have nothing else to say about that, enjoy this little tribute to Mike Lang that the team did when he retired in 2021.
It's a hockey night in Pittsburgh. Tonight from the Civic Arena, the Penguins meet the New York Islanders.
Hockey to the net. Here he comes. He shoots and scores. Mario Lemieux. Oh, great. Balls of fire. The Stanley Cup has come to the city of Pittsburgh. The 1991 Stanley Cup champions, the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Jaromir Jagr, ladies and gentlemen, allez, c'est déjà let the birdie.
Yeah, I love it. For the corner shot. Score! We're doing it. Wins it for the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's a hockey night in Pittsburgh. It's a hockey night in Pittsburgh. And I'll meet you in the schoolyard, baby, for all the marbles. I got the marbles.
This is absolutely a great thrill. It really is, no matter if it happens once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times.
And ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has just left the building.
That's pretty crazy that, I couldn't imagine the emotion he was feeling in 91 after, oh my gosh, Baz Bastien wrecking his car, the losing to the Islanders after being up 3 games to none. I mean, everything he had been through. What's that?
Bankruptcy.
Yeah, bankruptcy. I guess he wasn't there at least for Briere, but oh my goodness, that he had been through a lot with the team, and to finally see them, win a championship, and then get the three or four more. I mean, good for him. Good for him.
He's really the only constant too, because ownership had changed multiple times.
Yeah, he was there before Mario.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just an all-time Pittsburgh legend, right? I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Just an all-time Pittsburgh legend, and it's just it's amazing. Like, hey, why don't you come to the hockey game that night? And he didn't want to go. He didn't like hockey.
Yeah.
He didn't even know how it worked. He was a baseball guy. He wanted to be in baseball. He did announce Pirate games. We talked about that on another episode. People don't remember that. But baseball was a sport he loved, and then he ends up becoming this beloved hockey figure. So, again,
You
just
just
one of
never
those
know
little
where-
things.
Yeah, never know where life's gonna take you.
That's exactly right. All right, we did a lot of events that had nothing to do with Pittsburgh at the time, impacting a Pittsburgh sports team. So let's finish this episode with a game that actually did involve a Pittsburgh sports team. We're going to go back to the year 1988. The Steelers are playing the Kansas City Chiefs at Three Rivers Stadium. It's late in the season, and both teams stink. The Steelers are 2-10. The Chiefs are 3-8-1. And to the surprise,
Is Christian Okoye still with them?
I think this was the year before Christian Okoye.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I don't know. They don't have a lot of good
Nigerian
players.
Nightmare. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yep. To the surprise of no one, it's not a particularly good game. Lots of field goals, lots of turnovers, lots of penalties. The Steelers have a 16-10 lead in the final minutes, but Kansas City comes marching down the field for a potential game-winning score. The Steelers have one really, truly great player on that terrible team. It's cornerback Rod Woodson, who, again, we've talked about on the show before. We had him in our 100 greatest players episode. We had him pretty high. He had already made a huge interception in the end zone to kill a Kansas City drive earlier in the fourth quarter, which would have given them the lead. And now on this final drive, he makes another interception to seal the win. But hold everything, flag on the play. It's on Pittsburgh. So Kansas City keeps driving. That was kind of that team that year. The 88 Steelers just couldn't stop shooting themselves in the foot. Ultimately, it comes down to one final play. The Chiefs have the ball on the Steelers' 14-yard line with 5 seconds to play. Remember, it's a 6-point lead. So a touchdown wins it for Kansas City. An incomplete pass wins it for Pittsburgh. Steve, any guesses who your quarterback is for the 1988 Kansas City Chiefs?
1988. I don't know. Steve DeBerg. I don't know.
You are correct.
Oh wow! What a guess.
It's Steve DeBerg. Good. Yes, very impressive. He drops back to pass, and he sees that the Steelers have inexplicably left wide receiver Kittrick Taylor wide open in the back of the end zone. Again, like I said about shooting themselves in the foot, they blow coverage somewhere. This receiver, Kittrick Taylor, he's wide open. So DeBerg throws it, but he throws it a little too high. Taylor leaps and the ball glances off his fingertips, falls to the ground. Game over. Steelers win. Linebacker Greg Lloyd.
What do we have? 4 wins?
Yeah, that gets the Steelers to 4 wins.
Yeah.
Linebacker Greg Lloyd, who was the closest person to the wide open Taylor, says, quote, "I was praying it was over his head. It was scary. If that ball had been level, we lose." Center Mike Webster says, quote, "I've never said the rosary that many times, and I'm not even Catholic." It's a super lucky break for the Steelers. They get the W because Steve DeBerg couldn't hit a wide open receiver. But I mean, like you said, who cares, right? It makes the Steelers 3-10 instead of 2-11. What's the difference? Well, fast forward to April and the 1989 NFL Draft. Had Steve DeBerg completed that pass, it would have moved the Steelers from the number 7 overall pick to the number 3 overall pick in that draft. And they would have had their choice between the following 3 players, Steve: Barry Sanders, Derek Thomas, or Deion Sanders.
I'm kind of glad he missed that pass. Well,
Really?
I mean, 2 of those guys.
Sure about that?
Deion, I couldn't have put up with Deion. I'm sorry.
Well, could you imagine those 1990s Cower run first teams with Barry Sanders as the running back? Could you imagine a linebacking core with Greg Lloyd and Derek Thomas? And I know you don't like Deion Sanders, but could you imagine a secondary with both
that's
Rod
true.
Woodson and Deion Sanders?
Nobody's throwing the ball on us.
I mean,
Two
you couldn't
best
have even.
corners of all time, arguably.
Yeah, you wouldn't have even completed a pass. Now imagine the losses to the Chargers in the championship game or the Cowboys in the Super Bowl.
That's not happening. Yeah. Well,
with one of those
we're making the
players.
Super Bowl.
Yep.
We're not. Yeah. Tony Martin isn't getting by Deion Sanders.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Imagine one of those players instead of Tim Worley, the guy that the Steelers settled on with their number 7 pick.
Tim Worley.
So the legacy of those 1990 Steelers teams that were always so close but could never win a Super Bowl could have been very different had Steve DeBerg just thrown the ball a few inches lower.
little lower. You're seeing we would have had 7 Super Bowls already.
I mean, it would have been very different. Like I said, any one of all 3 of those players are Hall of Famers and all-time greats. It would have been different. I know that. But like I said, small little things, right? The singular plays, game of inches. That's the butterfly effect that we talked about at the beginning of the episode.
Or the Dion effect.
The Coach Prime effect. So that's our episode. I hope you enjoyed that. Like I said, I thought it was just pretty interesting to look back at these just little tiny things that really altered the trajectory of Pittsburgh sports history, things that you wouldn't think really mattered at the time, or things that had nothing to do with Pittsburgh, but really did have a large impact. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this show and your continued support. You can always find us on Facebook or Twitter. You can always contact the show via email. There's a bunch of links in the show description for all that stuff. We also appreciate all the time word of mouth, telling other people about the podcast. That's how we tend to attract new listeners. So thanks again, and we will catch you next time.